In this video, we'll show you how to change the lower control arm on your Ford F-150. You can find it on CarParts.com via the link in the description. Before lifting your vehicle, it is necessary to measure the distance between the center of your wheel and the wheel arch. This will allow you to achieve an optimal tightening of the parts in their initial position. For safety reasons, we strongly suggest watching our video on how to jack your Ford F-150 safely. To be able to replace the lower control arms on your vehicle, you need to remove multiple parts. The components to be removed are very often seized up, so don't hesitate to brush and to use penetrating oil to make removal easier. Start by removing the sway bar end link lower ball joint holding nut. Using an 18mm offset wrench, unscrew the nut from the lower ball joint. Use a ratchet and an 8mm socket to keep the ball joint from rotating. Then remove the lower nut. Disconnect the vacuum lines. Remove the ABS sensor cable from its fasteners. In our case, the fasteners were replaced with zip ties. Disconnect the ABS sensor's power cable. To do this, push on the tab and pull on the connector. Using a fork, disconnect the ABS sensor cable from the body. Disconnect the ABS sensor cable from the brake hose. To loosen the nut at the end of the CV axle, you must stop the rotation of the brake disc. Insert a flathead screwdriver thin enough to fit between the two walls of the disc. Remove the central wheel hub cover. You can use adjustable pliers. Use a ratchet, an extender, and a 13mm socket to unscrew the nut on the end of the CV axle. Then remove the screwdriver. Now you need to remove the brake system. Tip: attach a piece of electrical cable or a hook to the subframe. Using a ratchet, an extender, and an 18mm socket, unscrew the two holding bolts on the caliper mount. Remove the caliper assembly and hang it on the hook. Then remove the disc. Using a 21mm wrench, loosen the upper control arm ball joint nut and unscrew it a few threads. Use a ratchet and a 10mm socket to keep the ball joint from rotating. It is now time to remove the outer tie rod from the knuckle. Remove the cotter pin from the castellated nut of the outer tie rod with pliers. Brush the outer tie rod holding nut and spray it with penetrating oil. Using a 19mm wrench, unscrew the outer tie rod holding nut. Tap on the knuckle to release the ball joint. Finish unscrewing the nut. Then remove the ball joint from the wheel knuckle. Brush off the nut of the lower control arm and spray it with penetrating oil. Wipe it off with a paper towel. This truck is equipped with alignment camber bolts so that you can adjust the alignment of your vehicle. Using a marker, trace a line between the alignment camber bolt and the frame, which will allow you to get as close as possible to the initial wheel alignment setting when reassembling. In any case, a wheel alignment check will have to be carried out by a professional soon after having performed this operation. Repeat the operation on the other camber bolt. Brush off the nut of the lower control arm ball joint and spray it with penetrating oil. Using a 24mm wrench, loosen the lower control arm ball joint nut and unscrew it a few threads. Use a ratchet and a 12mm socket to keep the ball joint from rotating. To be able to remove the lower ball joint completely, you need to remove the wheel knuckle. Disconnect the upper control arm from the wheel knuckle so that you can remove the drive shaft from the hub. Pry with a small crowbar. Finish unscrewing the nut. Remove the upper control arm ball joint from the wheel knuckle. You can now pull the CV axle out of the hub. Take a zip tie and hang the CV axle to prevent it from falling. Using a ball joint puller, a specific tool for carrying out this job, release the ball joint. Finish unscrewing the nut. Extract the wheel knuckle. Then, use a 27mm wrench, a ratchet, and a 30mm socket to prevent the bolt from rotating and unscrew the nut of the strut foot. Finish unscrewing the nut by hand. Extract the bolt from the foot of the strut. You can use a plastic mallet. Using a crowbar, release the strut foot from the control arm. Then, using a ratchet and a 27mm socket, unscrew the two alignment camber bolt holding nuts. Block the rotation with a 21mm wrench. Finish unscrewing by hand. You can now remove the alignment camber bolt. Repeat the operation on the other camber bolt. You can now remove the lower control arm by pulling it towards you and moving it back and forth. Brush and grease the control arm area to facilitate its installation.
For great content, our best price, and fast shipping, download the CarParts.com app now.
Take a zip tie and hang the outer tie rod. You can order the lower control arms used in the video on CarParts.com via the link in the description. Take the new control arm. Unscrew the ball joint retaining nut. Remove the plastic cover. Grease the control arm bushings to facilitate its installation. Take the camber bolts. Depending on the condition of the camber bolts, you can brush and apply copper grease to extend the bushing's lifespan. Install the control arm. Reinsert the two alignment camber bolts. Then, roughly screw the retaining nuts back on. While inserting the strut foot, insert the link into the lower control arm. Screw the nut of the lower ball joint of the sway bar end link back on. Use the marking drawn with a marker and put the camber bolts back in place. Then screw the nuts back on until they make contact. Take the wheel knuckle. Using a wire brush, scrub the knuckle of the wheel knuckle. Then apply silicone grease to the flat part that will be in contact with the lower control arm ball joint sleeve. Do not grease the inside of the cone. Reinsert the ball joint, then screw it back on. You can now cut the zip ties with wire cutters. Fully reinsert the CV axle into the wheel hub assembly. Roughly put the hub nut back in place. Now you can replace the bolt of the strut foot. Use the jack to align the control arm bushing with the bolt insertion hole. Meanwhile, reinsert the bolt. You can use a plastic mallet. Then screw the nut back on until it's tight. Then use a jack to lift the wheel knuckle in order to retighten the nut that holds the upper control arm ball joint in place. Put the upper ball joint back in place in the wheel knuckle. Pry with a small crowbar. Loosely screw the nut of the upper control arm ball joint back on. Lift the lower control arm with the jack until the original measurement between the center of the wheel and the wheel arch is reached. You can then screw the nut back in using a ratchet. You can now finish tightening the strut foot holding nut with a torque wrench. Screw the nut on the lower ball joint of the sway bar end link back on. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Finish tightening the camber bolts with a torque wrench. Screw the nut of the lower control arm ball joint back on. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Screw the nut of the upper control arm ball joint back on. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Remove the jack. Put the outer tie rod back in place in the knuckle. Reassemble the castle nut and tighten it using a 19mm wrench. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Take the other cotter pin and fit it into the castle nut. You can now bend the cotter pin. Reinstall the brake disc. Here's a tip. To make it easier to install the caliper, hold the disc using 2 nuts. You can now reinstall the caliper assembly. And screw it back on. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Remove the nuts. Don't forget to remove the cable that you used to hold the caliper assembly together. You can now reconnect the vacuum hoses. Reconnect the vacuum lines. Then, reclip all of the ABS sensor cable retaining clips. Reconnect the connector. Put the ABS sensor cable back in place. Put the zip tie back in place. Again, using the screwdriver technique to stop the rotation. Finish tightening the hub nut with the torque wrench. Put the cover back on the nut. Then remove the screwdriver. Then you will be able to put the wheels back on your vehicle. Put your truck back on the ground before properly fixing the wheels in place. Operation complete.
Quality parts, priced right.